Good morning. Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles. I'm the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana at 5600 Van Road. You can find us there at 10 a.m. every Sunday for our regular Sunday worship period. You could also get there an hour early and then be with us for our Bible classes. And we also have a worship period in the afternoons on every Sunday at 4. We would also love to have you join us on Wednesday evenings at 6:30 p.m. for our Wednesday Bible studies. We have classes for all ages. If you'd like to get in touch with us by phone, give us a call or send a text to 812-550-6234 or send an email to info@riverridgechurch.org, and we would love to hear from you and get back to you as soon as we can. Those are great ways to sign up for our weekly bulletin. If you'd like to receive those articles every week in your mail, then you can just tell us that's what you want. Give us your name and address, and we'll add you to the list. And we have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/River Ridge Church of Christ, where you can find all of our past TV programs, all of our worship and Bible studies live streamed on that channel. And the TV programs are also handily organized into playlists, including our largest series of books of the Bible, but also some smaller playlists as well based on certain series that I have done, whether in sermons or on the show. You will note from my voice that I am still sick, but today we are adding an installment in that longest playlist on the YouTube channel. We will be looking at another book of the Bible. This time it is the Old Testament minor prophet called Haggai. Now, Haggai is the second shortest book in the Old Testament after Obadiah, which we have covered previously. Haggai is only 2 chapters long. Let's just start out in chapter 1, verse 1. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month, the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Yeshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Thus says the Lord of hosts, These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the house of the Lord. Then the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, Consider your ways. You have sown much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm, and he who earns wages does so to put them into a bag with holes. Thus says the Lord of hosts, Consider your ways. Go up to the hills, and bring wood, and build the house, that I may take pleasure in it, and that I may be glorified, says the Lord. You looked for much, and behold, it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, declares the Lord of hosts? Because of my house that lies in ruins, while each of you busies himself with his own house. Okay, well, God's clearly upset about something, and we've got a pretty good idea as to what it is, but in what context? What's going on here? Well, verse 1 establishes the time. The 2nd year of Darius the king, the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month. Where is this on the timeline? Well, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of August 29th of 520 BC. Well, in 539, so 19 years prior, King Cyrus had made his edict allowing exiled peoples to return home. And so, of course, a lot of the exiled Jews did return home. And you can read about that at some length in the book of Ezra, where chapters 1 and 2 cover the actual return, and then in chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, we read, When the 7th month came, and the children of Israel were in the towns, the people gathered as one man to Jerusalem. Then arose Yeshua the son of Jozadak with his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel with his kinsmen, and they built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses the man of God. They set the altar in its place, for fear was on them because of the peoples of the lands, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening. And they kept the Feast of Booths, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number according to the rule, as each day required. So they started with the altar so that they can make their offerings. Then, verse 8, Now in the 2nd year after their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Jozadak made a beginning, together with the rest of their kinsmen, the priests and the Levites and all who had come to Jerusalem from the captivity. They appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to supervise the work of the house of the Lord. And Yeshua with his sons and his brothers, and Kadmiel and his sons, the sons of Judah, together supervised the workmen in the house of God, along with the sons of Henadad and the Levites, their sons and brothers. And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, etc. So they have organized, and they have now laid the foundation, which is a much bigger project than it sounds like, because the temple is built on a man-made mountain. Then in chapter 4, verse 4, Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah, and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius king of Persia. So 18 years ago, things seemed really great, but the work has been stalled since then. Then in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, now the prophets Haggai and Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Jozadak arose and began to rebuild the house of God that is in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. Well, that right there is a summary of the book of Haggai just in those 2 verses. You will also notice that Zechariah is mentioned. Well, if we flip over to Zechariah, which is right after Haggai in the canon, we read chapter 1, verse 1. In the 8th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo, saying, The Lord was very angry with your fathers, etc. Now, the oracles given to Zechariah mostly take place after Haggai. He gives a message of encouragement for the returned exiles, basically saying, God is with you, so trust him and obey him. That's really not all that different from the message that Haggai was giving, but, well, details matter. Back in Haggai chapter 1, verse 2, Thus says the Lord of hosts, These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the house of the Lord. Why would they say that? The time has not yet come? What time could possibly be better than right now? Well, remember the surrounding enemies and the, bribed counselors and those sorts of people. There's always some kind of reason. In fact, if you turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 11, you will see Solomon taking note of this in verse 4. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. There it's put in the context of farming, but the same principle applies everywhere else in life. There's always a plausible reason that this is not the right time to do whatever thing it just so happens that I don't want to do. Now, that doesn't mean that every such reason is just an excuse, but it does mean that at some point you're going to have to bite the bullet and just do it. And you can see that it's an excuse with the Israelites having returned from exile in Haggai chapter 1 because of what they are choosing to do instead. In chapter 1, verse 4, Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? They're totally fine with beautifying their own houses, with building their own little kingdoms. It's not like they just can't spare the extra time and effort. They've got plenty. Or at least they did, until God started using the natural world to try to poke and prod them and let them know that they were misplacing their focus. Well, they really just weren't getting it. As God said in verse 6, You have sown much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm, and he who earns wages does so to put them into a bag with holes. God has deliberately decided to make it difficult for them until they shape up. What does he want? Verse 8, Go up into the hills and bring wood and build the house, that I may take pleasure in it, and that I may be glorified, says the Lord. This is a pretty strong indictment of these returned exiles, and it has obvious present-day parallels. We'll get more into that at the end of the show, but first of all, what happened? Verse 12. Then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of the Lord their God, and the words of Haggai the prophet, as the Lord their God had sent him. And the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai the messenger of the Lord spoke to the people with the Lord's message. I am with you, declares the Lord. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Yeshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and worked on the house of the Lord of hosts, their God. Now, this was a very large project with a fairly long timeline. In fact, we can see that timeline back in Ezra. In chapter 6, verses 14 and 15 say, And the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They finished their building by decree of the God of Israel, and by decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes king of Persia. And the house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Well, that would be in the year 515 BC, so it was something like 4.5 years of work to get it done. Now, I should note that there was plenty more still to do at that point, especially in the city surrounding the temple, but the temple was at least perfectly usable by that point. Haggai doesn't cover all of that, just the picking up with work again. Chapter 2 is very early in that process, after they got into gear. Let's read the first 3 verses. In the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. Speak now to Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Yeshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to all the remnant of the people, and say, Who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes? Well, that seems kind of like a letdown, doesn't it? I mean, they only started to do this work again like a month ago, and already God is anticipating a lack of motivation and that their work is not really living up to the standard. Why is God planting the seeds of despair and doubt? Well, he's not. See, back in Ezra again, chapter 3, so before the book of Haggai has taken place, verses 12 and 13 read, "But many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away." So it's great that the foundation is being rebuilt, but it's also a reminder of the grief of having the temple torn down in the first place, and a reflection of the relative disappointment at, well, the new one, which just isn't measuring up. We can see another hint of this in Zechariah chapter 4, by the way, beginning in verse 8. "Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house. His hands shall also complete it. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. For whoever has despised the day of small things shall rejoice, and shall see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel." Some of the Israelites looked at the work being done on this rebuilding of the temple, and they despised it. They considered it to be small in comparison to Solomon's temple from before. However, back in Haggai chapter 2, we'll pick up where we left off in verse 4. "Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Yeshua, son of Jehozadak the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts, according to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt. My spirit remains in your midst. Fear not, for thus says the Lord of hosts, Yet once more in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. And I will shake all nations, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts." Wow! That is some great encouragement, especially the beginning of verse 9 there. The latter glory of this house will be greater than the former. He's saying, better than Solomon's? How would they interpret this? Well, think about their situation. Some of them, the older ones of course, have seen the previous temple, and they remember its incredible wealth and majesty and grandeur. They remember the association with Solomon, and we've got the nation's treasures being mentioned here, the gold and the silver. In fact, if we turn back to 1 Kings and just run through a few passages that will give us an idea of how much of a callback to the previous temple this is, I think it will illustrate the point very nicely. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 20, "Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life." The latter part of verse 24, "And he had peace on all sides around him." Verse 34, "And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth, who had heard of his wisdom." Chapter 9, verse 26, "King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent with the fleet his servants, seamen who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon. And they went to Ophir, and brought from there gold, 420 talents, and they brought it to King Solomon." Continuing into chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. "Now when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind." Jump down to verse 14. "Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold." Verse 21. "All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. For the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks." So, given their past golden age, what would be the expectation of these returning exiles? "Move over, Persia. Jerusalem is here. We'll be dominant as our ancestors were in David's and Solomon's time. Frankly, we'll be even better. Finally, we'll get what we deserve. Finally, we will get what God promised us." But while there were elements of earthly fulfillment in the reestablishment of a Jewish state and the monarchy through the Hasmoneans, which we'll talk about later. There was an influence on Gentiles through the diaspora, the result of the mass deportations by Assyria and Babylon, leading to more and more Gentiles recognizing the Lord as the one true God and converting and or bringing offerings to this temple in Jerusalem. While all of that's true, this was all pretty underwhelming, if we're totally honest. Alexander the Great will waltz in with no resistance. After his death, the Seleucids in the Syrian north and the Ptolemies in the Egyptian south will play tug of war, and Israel is the ribbon on the middle of the rope, marking who is winning at the moment, and getting dragged through the mud repeatedly. That would be followed up by a brief period of independence, the Hasmoneans and all, until the Roman general Pompey the Great waltzed in and took over. Again, these events were very important to the Jews, but they were very small, petty, in the grand scheme of things. That's because Israel's political future isn't really what God means here. He does mean that, but only as another shadow. More importantly, Jesus would be dedicated in this very temple. Jesus would worship and teach and cleanse in its courtyards. God's presence in this temple wouldn't just be a cloud like in Exodus 40 and 1 Kings 8. God in the flesh would be seen there, face to face. There are two more oracles in Haggai. The first one is a month and a half after the resumption of work. Let's read verse 12. If someone carries holy meat in the fold of his garment, and touches with his fold bread or stew or wine or oil or any kind of food, does it become holy? The priests answered and said, No. Well, that seems like a pretty esoteric and frankly irrelevant legal question, but how does it work? Well, there are certain things that are set apart, that are holy or sanctified, and for the most part, them coming into contact with something common does not spread the holiness to the common thing. In fact, it's more likely to go the other way. If something unclean touches something that is holy, that is an infraction, a transgression of its holiness. As the priest said, no, the holiness does not rub off from one thing to the next, and so on. Verse 13. Then Haggai said, If someone who is unclean by contact with a dead body touches any of these, does it become unclean? The priest answered and said, It does become unclean. So here's that principle. Uncleanness rubs off. Holiness generally does not rub off. So, what's the point? Verse 14. Then Haggai answered and said, So is it with this people, and with this nation before me, declares the Lord, and so with every work of their hands. And what they offer there is unclean. Here they are working on a holy task. But the fact that they are working on a holy task does not make the workers holy. In fact, their uncleanness threatens to taint their work and to keep it from becoming holy. And God alludes to this in verse 17. I struck you and all the products of your toil with blight and with mildew and with hail, yet you did not turn to me, declares the Lord. But now things are changing. Now, verse 18, consider from this day onward, from the 24th day in the 9th month, since the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider, is the seed yet in the barn? Indeed, the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have yielded nothing. But from this day on, I will bless you. Now they have turned away from the unclean. They have turned toward God. And God says that he will, in turn, bless them. The last oracle begins in verse 21. Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I am about to shake the heavens and the earth, and to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I am about to destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations, and overthrow the chariots and their riders. And the horses and their riders shall go down, every one by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, O Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord, and make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. Huh? Well, 1 Chronicles 3, verse 1. These are the sons of David who were born to him in Hebron, the firstborn Amnon by Ahinoam the Jezreelite, the second Daniel by Abigail the Carmelite. Jump down to verse 10. The son of Solomon was Rehoboam, Abijah his son, Asa his son, Jehoshaphat his son. Skip down to verse 16. The descendants of Jehoiakim, Jeconiah his son, Zedekiah his son, and the sons of Jeconiah the captive, Shealtiel his son. Yes, that Shealtiel, about whom you have heard a number of times in the book of Haggai, as well as Ezra and Zechariah for that matter today. There's likely an adoption or two in there. It's kind of a confusing genealogy, but this makes Zerubbabel the next in line for the vacant throne of David. But now he is the governor, not the king. True enough, but God is showing approval to him and giving him part of that kingly role. Because, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 4, God said to David, "If your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel." But that pretty clearly meant that there would always be a king who was a descendant of David, and Zerubbabel is just not the same thing. So if we're going to say that in Zerubbabel being the governor under the thumb of Persia is a fulfillment of God's promise that David will not lack a descendant on the throne, I mean, come on, that's pretty pathetic. Again, it's underwhelming. Except Matthew chapter 1, beginning in verse 12. "And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matan, and Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ." Once again, we can see that it's all in service to God's big plans with his own son. There is a ton of application from Haggai today. First of all, we tend to get discouraged and distracted from working on God's house, so to speak. Today, the church is the temple of God, and it's not a physical building, but rather is a spiritual house. And God refers to it that way in Ephesians 1, in 1 Peter 2, 1 Corinthians 6. Anyway, we especially get distracted when the work is difficult, and when it takes a long time, and when it meets resistance, when it doesn't show immediate, tangible result and benefit. But are these valid excuses for disobeying the instructions that God has given in the job that he has given? Of course not. It didn't fly for the ancient Israelites who returned from their exile in Babylon. It's certainly not going to work for us. Another application, does membership in a particular group count for much if we refuse to pitch in? See, it seems like a lot of the Israelites returning from exile were trusting in their membership in the nation of Israel. That's what makes us special. And God's looking down on them going, "What are you doing? I gave you a job to do, and now you are goading me into punishing you repeatedly because I have expectations, and you just refuse to obey. What good is it to wear the name Israelite if you're not actually going to help build God's house?" We could say the same thing about wearing the name Christian today. Further, when we get distracted, what do we typically do instead? Well, we work on our own houses. Again, so to speak. Now, that could take the form of literally working on your own house and beautifying it and making it into something special that you can't take with you. But more likely it's going to apply in a broader sense of your own little kingdom, the life that you have built for yourself, when none of that is going to last for the long haul, and you can't take any of it with you past your death. How does God like it when we build our own houses and reject his? Luke chapter 12, verse 13. "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' But he said to him, 'Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?' And he said to them, 'Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions.' And he told them a parable, saying, 'The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God.'" Another application, when things don't go your way, have you considered that maybe God is trying to teach you something? Now, it's a mistake to always blame him for anything that doesn't go your way, of course. It's a mistake to use this line of thinking as an excuse to give up on hard things that you really don't want to do in the first place, but know that you should. But it's also a mistake to discount the possibility and refuse to reflect on your choices and responsibilities and motives. Another application is that the Israelites in Haggai are a great example for us to follow. For a change, they listened. Now, they could have gotten defensive. They could have questioned Haggai's credibility or his motives or his honesty or even his interpretation of what God had said. They could have persecuted him as their ancestors did to so many of the earlier prophets. Instead, they accepted the correction. Without becoming personally offended, they just changed their behavior for the better. Does anybody think less of them for admitting fault and changing? I mean, maybe like 3 people in their daily lives then, but in the grand scheme of things, everybody thinks much more highly of them now. Why is this so hard for us? Because it means accepting that someone like Haggai has some level of authority to tell me what to do. And that's just hard, especially in a society like ours where rebellion against authority is kind of the keystone. Did their obedience accomplish salvation or bring Jesus down to earth? No, not really. But it was involved in a narrow sense. It would be absurd for the builders to take credit for God's glory and salvation, his great plans. But it would be rebellious to insist that only God can do those things, and so I'm not going to obey his instructions and rebuild the house like he told me to do. It would also be a mistake to obey, but then tell others at every opportunity that obedience is futile and, frankly, unnecessary as God's in charge, and he'll do whatever he's going to do, and you can't influence him one way or the other. If God's in charge, doesn't that mean we all need to obey him? Anything else betrays a lack of trust and submission to him, which are the heart qualities that God is seeking in the first place. Finally, consider the connection between David and Zerubbabel, the temple, and Jesus. The man of God's own choosing is given authority to speak for God. He's made into that signet ring, the seal, the stamp of approval for God. Obeying him is obeying God. That applied with Zerubbabel, and it applies a whole lot more with God's own son. Through Zerubbabel's descendant, Jesus, God shattered the arrangement of the world, and he defeated the greatest and, up until then, undefeated enemy of the world, death. Are you subject to his will and his word? If you have been rebelling against his rule or trusting in membership with some group without actively participating in serving God yourself and in building his house, you need to change. It's time to get to work. God's not saying that you can't have your own nice house. He's saying that it would be pointless and insulting to him if his house doesn't come first and supersede all of your desires and, frankly, encompass your earthly plans and house. We would love to have you working with us at River Ridge. You can get in touch with us by phone at 812-550-6334 or send an email to info@riverridgechurch.org. You can also find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh for Sunday morning worship at 10. I hope to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.